Good morning. Welcome to Studio Time with Deb, the online version. Today, what we're going to be talking about is scoring and bending wire and fitting it to different pieces. So we use scoring and bending of wire when we want to make really crisp corners on something, but leave some structural integrity. You can imagine if you're building let's say a diamond shape like that. Okay, I can make this out of one piece of wire. I can make this out of one piece of wire. But if I can leave this, at least one end soldered or together because of the way I've scored and bent, then I only have one solder joint that is critical, that can shift around on me. That makes something so much more stable when I go to work on it. So, and I'll show you some other examples of that. But it basically leaves it as one piece of metal. You can score and bend wire or sheet. We're going to talk today about wire. And if you're doing wire, you can do any size of wire. You can do any shape of wire. If you do rectangular wire, you can do the long side or the short side. I'm going to show you examples of some different ones of this. What I am going to do is to go through some slides with you. And I did some drawings. I'm going to explain them. So one of the things that you need to remember is that the angle of the bend is determined by the width of the groove, and that the angle of the bend, the inside angle of the bend, plus the width of the groove always equals 180 degrees. All right? Now, that's not that hard. And for those of you who are math impaired and don't like numbers, just think of it as that the width of the groove, and so the width of the groove down here, and this inside angle up here always equal a straight line. Okay. So on this one, if I make a tiny little narrow groove, then the metal's only going to bend up a little bit, right? And this is really more forgiving than you think. It's not, you don't have to be exactly 30 degrees. You don't have to be exactly 150. The metal is a little bit mushable, especially silver. It just and copper too. It just kind of mushes around. So you can adjust that angle some. What you basically need to remember is that if you want a very slight angle, you need a very slight groove. Notice that the groove goes 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through the metal. That's important, and that's something that we're going to talk about more. On this one, if I want a very tight corner, then I need a very wide groove so that I can take that metal and I can lay it all the way over. Okay, so one of the things that happens a lot of times when people do scoring and bending of wire is that they'll score a little bit, they'll bend it, they'll open it up, they'll score a little bit, they'll bend it, they'll open it up. It's going to break. I guarantee it's going to break. You can anneal. Sometimes you can get away with that. A lot of times you can't. If it does break, then you're basically back to where you started with two pieces of metal. That's not the end of the world. I'm going to show you what happens when that goes wrong and how to handle that. But basically, I recommend that you not bend it until you're pretty confident that you've got things in the right place. If anything, you should make your groove on the narrow side. And that's because I could always take a saw and I could saw down this line if I want this angle right here to be tighter. Okay? I can always make it tighter. If I make it looser, then I've got a gap here that I need to fill with solder, and that doesn't look as good. So if anything, I want to make this groove a little smaller than I think I need for it to be. There's a lot of ways to make the groove. You can use a flat file. Be sure that you're not using a Blindside files. A lot of flat files, not all flat files, but a lot of flat files have what we call a blind side. It's a side that has no teeth on it. And the reason that it has that is because if you are filing inside, say inside a square, inside a frame, you want to file one side but not the other side. That blind side protects that other side so that you're not filing and you're not going to get a notch in there. Okay, so having a blind side on the file is really beneficial. But if you're trying to file both of these sides at once down here, having a blind side on a file is not going to work. So be sure that you're using a file that doesn't have a blind side on it. You can use a knife edge file, a triangular file. You can also use separating discs. You can use a saw. You can use, there's all kinds of things you can use. You probably could stamp it. The steps, what you're going to do is, first of all, you're going to determine where to make the groove. Now, this is easier said than done. So I'm going to show you 3 scenarios for making a groove in the wire. This bottom piece is your wire. You can pretend it's square or round, or it doesn't really matter. This is a stone. Isn't that a gorgeous stone? I colored it myself. So what you're going to do, this piece is going to be fitted to the outside of the stone. I'm going to basically make a frame, a tight frame around this stone. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to make sure that the edge of my groove lines up with the edge of my stone, the corner of my stone, right there and right there. Okay? And what I have to do is and I can't tell you how far over to go here. And the reason I can't tell you how far over to go is because remember that it's 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through the wire. So what I have to do is to look at the thickness of my wire, and then I have to look at half the thickness of my wire, and then I have to come over here as much as I think that that's about that much. It's kind of a guesstimate. All right. So okay. So what I have to do, this is wire dependent, where exactly the bottom of this groove is, where it starts. And that's something you're going to have to figure out. It depends on the wire, it depends on the angle here, because remember that this side has a lot wider angle, right? A lot wider groove than this side. This side is 90 degrees, this side is more. And because it's wider, I'm going to have to start further over. Okay. This is the same picture, but now I have folded these up. So this is that first corner I made, the second corner I made, and I have folded them up to fit my stone. This is where I would make my next groove, right here on this corner and going up. What I would do is to curve this piece of metal before I bend this over. I would try to have it match the stone. Then I would bend it over, and then these 2 pieces, this one and this one, are going to overlap. And where they overlap, I can choose to either do a mitered corner. I usually don't. I usually do a square corner. I just cut one of them off. The next scenario I'm going to tell you about is if the wire goes underneath the stone. And I'm going to show you some slides in a little bit that it would explain why I would do this. But sometimes I have a stone, and what I want to do is to say I want to put prongs around it, but I need a good seat for that stone, right? So what I can do is that I could build a base for it that goes all the way around. That's basically a square wire that goes all the way around underneath the stone. And then I can attach my prongs or tabs or whatever to that. So this is the way to do that. What I would do on this is that I put my stone up to my wire and I mark exactly where the corner is. And that is exactly where I want the bottom of that groove to be. Now remember, because we're going only 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through, there's going to actually be a little bit of metal down here. So there's going to be a little bit extra down here and a little bit extra on the side. I want that. I could sand it off if it's too much, but I want a little bit, because if I solder prongs or tabs on there, I still want my stone to fit, right? I don't want to have my stone not, once I solder prongs on, not be able to go in and sit down. So I want a little bit extra. So what I would do with this is I mark the corner exactly where the corner is. That's where my bottom groove is, the bottom of my groove. I'm going to do that. And then what I'll do is when I turn it up, that is underneath the stone. And then I would do the same thing here. I would mark exactly where that is. And then I would cut a groove there.
Deb, would you mind going back to the last one? I was trying to figure out the difference between what the one before that, where the wire is on that one. Oh,
see
okay.
that see here, these are on the outside, right? So the
Right.
way to think about it is if I'm thinking about my wire right here on, I want my stone lined up with the inside of the wire here. I want it lined up with the inside of the wire over here, right? But this one, I want it lined up on the outside all the way around. That's the difference. Okay. This is the third scenario. Third scenario is I want some space between my stone and the wire. How much space do I want? I want 1 millimeter. If I want 1 millimeter, what size round wire am I going to put in there for prongs? Somebody answer me.
1 millimeter?
1 millimeter.
18.
What size? What gauge? Come on.
18.
Thank you. Okay, so 18 gauge is 1 millimeter, is 40 thousandths, is a number 60 drill bit. That is a really important comparison for you to know, and you should know that. So I left 1 millimeter right here. And the reason I left 1 millimeter is so I can use 18 gauge wire and put it in there, and I know that it's gonna be right. So what I'm gonna do on this one is I'm going to mark on my wire where my stone hits. I'm gonna add a millimeter to that, and that is gonna be the edge of my wire, or edge of my groove.
Sorry, Deb, I am totally not following. I know that 18 gauge is a 60 drill bit, and that's a millimeter, but I don't understand how you picked that or where the prongs go or anything.
I'm gonna put prongs on the inside of the square wire here,
Okay,
and I picked 1 millimeter because I want you to know that.
okay,
You can pick anything you want. You
All
could
right.
make it be 14 gauge. You could make it be, but whatever measurement you use away from the stone, you also need to use as the measurement from this corner point to this corner point. You need to add that on to whatever it is you're doing.
okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. And then if I do that, so I've got my 1 millimeter here, and I've got my 1 millimeter here, and I've got my 1 millimeter here. If I do that, when I bend it up, then I have equal spacing all the way around like this, right? And so what I'm gonna do on this corner here is I'm going to mark where my stone is. I'm gonna go up a millimeter, and then my V groove would be up in here. And then
Deb,
I'll have
is
1
this-
millimeter all the way around my stone.
Is this on a piece of sheet metal or is this,
I've got a wire and a stone.
okay,
Yeah, we're only talking wire today, Shelley.
okay. Is the prongs gonna be soldered onto the wire around the stone?
So let's go back. So on this scenario here, where I have the frame on the stone, I probably wouldn't do prongs. I probably would do a piece of sheet metal or something else on the back of it, or just little tabs or something to go around it. This one, I could definitely do prongs, and I would do prongs out here on the outside, or tabs or something like that. So when I look at this stone, what's going to happen is all I'm going to see from the top is the prongs or the tabs or something like that. I'm not going to see, but maybe the barest amount of this metal, just as a whisper of that metal, okay? On this one, I am going to put the prongs on the inside, solder them to this wire. The prongs are going to hold this, and then it's got air space in here. So my wire is going to be on the outside, my prongs in here, and it's going to look like the stone floats. Okay? So this is a sample of one that I was doing as a sample for you for this class. And I took a picture of this on my bench. What I want you to notice is I scored and bent this corner and everything was fine. I curved this, I scored and bent what I thought was the right place on this corner, and it's not. Look at this huge gap I've got here. That's not okay. I can't have that. So when that happens, what I can do is just, rather than having one piece of wire that goes all the way around the piece, I can go ahead and break this. I'm no worse off than I would be if I had all separate pieces, right? I'm actually still better off because this corner over here is just fine. So what I did, and here you can see the gap really well, okay? So what I did was just break it off. I just opened it up, bent it back and forth, broke it off. And then what I'm able to do is to file this flat, take this wire, put it up to it in exactly the right place, solder it on, and then I can continue with my scoring and bending. I haven't really lost anything, except I've lost the structural integrity right here in this corner. But that's not that bad, especially if what I can do is score and bend this corner. Now I have two L-shaped pieces. When I have two L-shaped pieces, that is so much more stable than having just wires sitting there, right? I can take those and I can work them. So what I'm gonna do then is I soldered these together. So now I've got solder here, solder here, solder here, and this one is not yet fitted, this corner. And you can see that it's too long. See, it leaves a gap there. So I need to keep working this and filing it until it fits right up to there where I want it. And when it, see, I'm still working it. And when I have it in the right place, I can solder it and then I'm good to go. Do you see why it made sense to do those two L shapes as opposed to, you know, if I could do it all in one, that's great. But if I can't do it all in one, the two L shapes really do buy me a lot.
Deb, can I
Yeah.
ask you, do you not need a bezel for this?
Oh, so on this one, I would need something. The sides on this are particularly ugly. They're rounded and they're weird, and it couldn't be bezel set just because of the way they're rounded and weird, and it's not okay. So what I did was to frame the piece, and I will show you some others in a little bit about what I could do then to lock that in. I still have to lock it in front and back,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Anytime you set a stone, you have to think about how it's going to move, whether it can move up or down, sideways, either side, or twist, or forward or backward. So this one cannot twist, cannot move sideways, cannot move up or down, but it can move forward and backward. So I have to lock it in somehow that way, and I can figure out how to do that depending on what I design with the piece. I used rectangular wire on this because it was significantly taller than this slab of stone. And so that also buys me some leeway, because then I could put a little prong on the inside, I could put prongs on the outside and have them come over. I could solder a sheet to the top, I could solder a wire on the inside. It gives me lots and lots and lots of options to deal with this. This is making a groove. If you look down here, see this groove? This is in a really fat rectangular piece of wire that I was using for a ring. And this is the file I was using. I like using a big file. I typically use the largest file I can comfortably use for the job. And the reason for that is that I get a lot more out of each file stroke. And then I don't have to work as hard or as much. That's what the groove looks like. So I bent the first one. That's what the second one looks like. You can see the wire is curved. I'll show you this piece in a little bit. There's another shot. This is once it's soldered. So here's the process of what we do. You determine where to make the groove. You make the groove to the right angle, you bend, and then you solder, and always use hard solder. So you go in there and solder the piece. So every one of those is soldered, and I recommend highly that you do it as you go along, because if you don't solder as you go along, you're going to tend to break the pieces. So it's a matter of, it's a little time consuming, but it's worth it. Sometimes I try and cheat, and sometimes I get away with it, and sometimes I don't. But you can see this is a beautiful base for a ring. I'll show it to you in a little bit. So I put it on my finger and I marked where I want to cut it off. And then I'm playing with other elements that can go on it or in it or something else for a ring. So it's incomplete yet, but it's an interesting piece, kind of fun. Fun way to make a ring shank. Here's a close-up. So now I'm going to show you some work. All of the slides I'm showing you today of work is my work. I love scoring and bending. I didn't realize I loved it so much. I have lots of scoring and bending. This started out as pins for Yuma. Any of you who have ever been to the Yuma Symposium, you know that there's a pin exchange. And one year I made, I don't know, bazillions of pins. I don't know how I ended up, but I ended up with some spares. And I kept these and I turned them into earrings. And I think they're really, really fun. I think they're 14 gauge, scoring and bending, and then tack soldered them together. These are silver earrings. Again, scored and bent. This is a neck piece. There's a close-up of it. So you can see lots of scoring and bending. This was actually a challenge piece for a metal clay group that I was in. This is the piece, we exchanged pieces. This is the piece I was given to do something with. And so I mixed a crystal with it, and then I scored and bent and used prongs and whatnot. This is what I'm talking about prongs on the inside. See here, the prongs on the inside here of the wire. So this is another one that's just scored and bent, and it's a frame around a piece. This is a great way to frame something. This was a commission piece that I did. It's a 14 karat gold little hummingbird. So I really like scoring and bending. This is, Colin asked for a hard hat. He wanted a decorative hard hat. I don't think it's very functional, but it's decorative and it's kind of fun. I guess it's lightly functional. Anyway, he wanted something that was reminiscent of the local Burning Man logo. And so this is nickel silver wire. It's adhered, screwed into the helmet. And these are done with scoring and bending. That's the way I can put them together, right? So there you can see better what they are. And
that is really fun.
It is. I have a neighbor whose children went to a charter school, and they had an academic Olympics, and they wanted some award for that would be an ongoing thing. So they made a big plaque. And they asked me to make a torch for it. So this torch is about 2.5 feet long, maybe 3 feet all in all. I'd have to look at the measurements again. It's nickel silver on the top, and again, scoring and bending to make the flames. And they put it on a huge wooden plaque so that every year they can put a little sign on who won and that kind of thing. So here's a close-up of the flames. This is a terrible slide, and I apologize. It's the only slide I have. This is a piece of meteorite, and it was set in 14 karat gold with a diamond. You can see where the little prongs are, right? These were square wire prongs, and they are put on the inside of the frame. And again, scoring and bending. Notice on this, that the way this is set, this is enough, this and this is enough to keep the stone from going this way. It can't go up, it can't go sideways, it can't go forward and backward because the prongs go on both sides. So this is held in place even though this raw edge is exposed and shows.
Deb, do you use one piece of wire to make the front and back prongs and just bend it around?
Yes. Yes, because that's really easy to construct. What I can do, if I do my spacing absolutely properly, notice on this one too, that down here my spacing touches, and on this side it touches. It touches the meteorite. And then I bent it open to accommodate these two prongs, and the spacing across the top is equal to accommodate this, and there's spacing here to accommodate this. So yes, what I do is I build the frame, the outer frame, and then I put the prongs in, and when I lay the frame down on a fire brick, and when I put the prongs into the fire brick, I shove them in with pliers so that they stick down below and up above. And then that way, when I solder them on, I can bend the ones for underneath and for on top.
Stick them down below and up above.
Deb, when you're doing these prongs, because I've tried this before, I found it kind of challenging. I did the same thing. I folded the wire in half and soldered it on the inside where the fold was, but you know,
Wait, what?
so I folded, I had, the prongs you have there is one piece of wire, right? That's soldered to the side on the inside. And then you fold them once to pinch onto the piece, basically, right?
Yes.
Okay, so my struggle was that I now have more, fitting them was tough. What type of wire are you using for these prongs? Are you getting it very flat so that you don't have a huge piece of wire there between the piece that you're folding onto and the frame? Where the fold gets really thick is what I'm saying. So do you do it really thin?
No, Kathy. So what I would do, often I will use a rectangular wire. Sometimes I'll use a round wire. Sometimes I'll use a half round. Low dome, I think, is too flat for the most part. But I want that space. I use that space. See how it's got space right here? I
Yes.
use that space to give me visual space between the frame and the stone.
Okay.
So if anything, I let there be quite a bit of space. The other thing is, if your frame is about the width of the piece that you're trying to set, then when you go to bend your prongs over, they don't get thicker in the middle, right? It's only whatever the spacing of the wire was to start with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. Although it does change shape inside the fold a little bit. So
If it does, I just take a separating disc and route it out.
clean it out. Okay.
Yeah, or a burr, but
Mhm.
I have
probably a separating disc, and just clean out the corners.
Sorry to
Deb?
be so picky.
No, that's good, especially with your enamels. You have to be really careful with enamel because you can't put a lot of pressure on those. So you
Right.
need to be really careful about that inside space.
I mean,
Because
yeah, I've taken the pliers you had us make where you made we filed them down to they were
yes,
very thin for prong setting to give a little space in there while you're
yes.
bending over so you don't crunch whatever you're bending over. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The really sharp pliers getting in there, bending really sharp helps. But like I said, I would look in there, and if it did fold over any at all, I would take a separating disc and clean it out, and especially for enamels, because you want to relieve any pressure on that corner or you're going to chip it.
Correct. Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
So
Okay.
I have a question.
do you pre-bend the front and make it nice and then like force it on the other side? So
No.
I guess-
Stones, to set a stone, the key to setting any stone, any setting, anything, is that it must seat really, really well. So the first thing that I do when I do prongs like this is that I make it seat well. I do the back. I make sure the stone seats perfectly. It's touching all the prongs. The prongs are the length that I want, everything else. And then I make the front work.
Deb, what did
Yeah.
you mean by sticking the prongs in the fire brick, both the top and bottom? What did you mean by that exactly?
So if I lay the frame down on the fire brick and I take a wire and I put the wire in perpendicular to the frame, like these are going to be, I squish the wire into the fire brick. So it goes below the frame and above the frame.
Okay. Okay, I got it. Yeah.
I have a question about the last one. Sorry.
Oh,
So
I'm
it's
sorry.
called-
This is such a bad slide.
No, it's good. So the square prongs, do you score and bend them or just fold them, like Kathy said?
I just folded them. It's too hard to get in there to score and bend them. If they're really, really thick, you might want to do that.
So they fold
But-
over, huh?
Yeah, but for the most part, no, I don't.
Okay,
I
good.
just bend them.
Awesome. That's a beautiful piece.
Thanks. Oh, this is actually the back of the piece. So this one has a slab like the one that I just showed you, and it has a frame, and you can see the frame. So on this one, it's this sheet metal in the back that holds it on. It's these three prongs. So between this tab, this, and this, the stone can't go backwards, okay? This is the front of the piece. So on the front of the piece, it's held in right here and by this tab. And this, I angled the top of this so that this angles in a little bit. So it's held in right here. So it's held in here, here, and here. This is that sheet you saw from the back that goes on the back of it. So you can see how I held this piece in, right? And how come the piece can't escape. And why I like the scoring and bending. See how nicely it fits on that? This is another one that's scored and bent. So for those of you who have ever been to Yuma for the symposium, there's an old theater that they meet in. And the speakers on the side of the old theater that are up there are, to me, are reminiscent of this. This is where this design kind of came from a little bit for me to, it inspired by. And I think they're really beautiful pieces. I love playing with these. This is a simple one I want to show you. Number one, the bottom of the base of the stone is scored and bent on the bottom. And the reason for that is that I don't want two pieces of metal if I can help it, right? I'm going to solder all these prongs on. I'm going to solder this tab on. I would really prefer that this be as structurally sound as possible. So what I'm going to do is to score and bend one end, bring the other end around. I don't think I have a back shot of it. I'm going to bring the other end around, and then I'm going to solder the top of it so that basically then it's going to hold together. Then I can solder the tab on the outside of one side, all the prongs on the other side, and the bail is also scored and bent. Okay, so what I did was to take a piece of rectangular wire, score it, bend it, file it down to a point. Here you can see a little bit, see the wire right here that's underneath the stone all the way around? You just see a hint of it. This is it on the tab side. This ring, this is heat textured, this outer part here. And I had the heat texture, I soldered the stone setting in, I looked at it and it just looked too ordinary and too plain. So what I did was to take a piece of wire out here and I scored and bent right here. And I think that's just bent. So I think this is the only scored and bent. And then this is a little bit melted to kind of match that where it came around. And I just bent the wire to go around the outside of the ring here. But you can see where scoring and bending would be really helpful. If this was a separate piece of wire right here, in here, chances of me getting that soldered onto this ring and not have it fall apart would be really difficult. But having it all be one piece of wire, just with a little bit of solder right there to hold the, to close the groove, that's pretty easy. This is another one where the bail and the underneath of the stone are both scored and bent. This one has a wire, rectangular wire soldered on one side, prong soldered on the other side, tab soldered on the bottom. Because this is one of Michael's stones, the tab is sufficient because the stone is angled, so it folds over. Because of the shape of the stone, if I have pressure here and here, the stone can't go up, can't go down, can't go sideways, can't twist, can't go forward, can't go backward. Again, look at the bail, scored and bent up here. The other thing scoring and bending buys me is that there's no solder joint visible from the outside on the top of my bail. This is the back of the piece. This was a challenge piece from Mask, and they had us do a piece, and I don't remember exactly what the challenge was, but it was something like using a check mark or something like that in your design. And so this is a little tourmaline that's set. This is scored and bent right here. There's another view of it.
Hey, Deb,
Yeah.
Why does that stone not slide out the sides?
It's tension set. I mean, you can tension set stones like that. You could slide it out if you work really hard at it, but they're tight enough. The other thing is, can you see it's very slightly emerald cut? See the emerald cut here?
Uh-huh.
So if you take these tabs and they're long enough and you just kind of crimp it down a little bit, it holds it in.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, could you unset it? Yeah, but I could unset almost anything. So now I am going to show you something. So this is a piece that I've been working on for a very long time. It's one of these pieces that I pick up, I work on for a while, I put it back because I really can't stand doing it anymore. And then I pick it up and I work on it. I still love this piece. I really want to finish this piece. You're gonna laugh. So I'm gonna show this to you. This is a bowl. Can you see how big this is? Each one of those is scored and bent and shaped and fitted.
What kind of solder are you using?
All hard, whole thing, everything.
What are you dapping it into?
I'm not dapping it into anything. That's a really good question. What I'm doing with it is that I am forming it around another bowl. So I have a bowl that's a metal bowl that I have in the studio that I actually keep it over so it doesn't get mangled until I finish it. And so every time I fit a piece, I can fit it to that to make it in the rounded shape. I started out without a mold at all. That was a disaster. That was a real mess because every time I soldered something, it just went wonky, and you adjust one thing and something else doesn't. And so I found I tried dapping and that didn't work real well either. I needed a solid form. So when I got a bowl that was actually the size I was going to do, that made it all better. And then I was able to work it.
How do you support everything when you're soldering?
Oh my gosh, that is so tricky on this piece. Every time it's something different. I carve on fire brick. I use stacks of fire brick parts. I pin things. I use Cool Jewel. That's one reason, I can work on it for so long. And then after a little while, I just say, okay, I'm tired of this for now. And I set it aside, and then I'll pick it up in 6 months and try it again. So I'd really like to finish it. I think it's a really beautiful piece. I want it to be finished, but it's got a lot of soldering and a lot of pinning and a lot of work as far as figuring out how things, how they fit, how they lay, how to solder is tricky. There's a lot of joints where things are really, really close together.
What gauge is the wire?
I think this is all 14 gauge copper so far.
Thank you.
I don't think it will be ultimately. I think ultimately I'm going to do something else on it, but I haven't figured out what, or, it's got whole sections though that need to be filled in.
How will you stabilize it in a bowl shape when you're done?
The bottom here is actually really stable. So it's only these areas that are not complete, that are not stable. This is very stable down here. So from here to here is actually quite stable. I can push on it, I can pull on it, it doesn't go anywhere. It's fine. This one wiggles. The rest of them really don't.
So are you soldering with acetylene or your little torch?
Oh no, I use acetylene air. I use acetylene air almost exclusively. I don't use the little torch for hardly anything. I probably should use it more than I do, but for 45 years, I've used the acetylene air, so that's what I use. That's what I know how to do. Any other questions?
Well, I think that bowl is extremely gorgeous. So when you finish that one, could you make me one, please?
I'll put it on my list, Susan. I'll teach you how to make it. How's that? Actually, I just did teach you how to make it. So what I'm going to do now is I want to move over to my my little camera. I want to show you this. Do you remember this piece? We did this in one of the earlier ones. This is a clasp. This is made with scoring and bending. And the reason is, if these pieces each one of these two were 2 pieces of wire. When I go to solder this on again, because silver is such a good heat conductor, my chances of this outside falling apart are pretty decent. But if this is 1 piece of wire that was scored and bent and then soldered at the other end, my chances of holding it together are much, much better, which is one reason I really like scoring and bending. The other one is it's easy for me to figure out the inside of this. So I did the outside one first, and then to fit the inside, what I could do is to score and bend one end, make it fit the piece really well, and then I can figure out exactly where it overlaps and where to cut it, because everything is really stable for me. This piece, this is a bangle bracelet, and it is made with low dome wire and scoring and bending.
Is that scored and bent on the top side or underneath side?
On this one, it's scored on the outside, this bend right here. And on this bend, it's scored and bent on the inside. Inside, outside, 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 inside. These are, again, some pieces I'm working on. These have been on my bench forever.
On the same bracelet, Deb, do you shape it before you score it?
No.
Are the bends shaped ahead of time?
No.
Okay.
What I do is that I work it in one long piece, and then I can make adjustments. So I don't know where the final solder seam is. It's probably one of these, probably this one, but I don't know. But what I do is that I just kind of make curves around, and I do kind of random placement and random, like I said, there's 3 that go in here, 1 out, 1 in, 1 out, 1 in, 1 out. I don't know, I just kind of play with it. It's very fanciful when I'm doing it. It's not something that's super planned or super, this is just kind of a for fun thing, to see if it'll work and to see how they look. And so what I do is that I would bend, let's say I start here, and this is the beginning of my wire. So I come over here and I'm going to file right here. I'm going to file the groove on the outside of the wire, this side right here. And then I'm going to bend the wire. I bend it up. I'm going to solder that. And after I solder it, I can bend this part of the wire. Then I'm going to make the next one over here. I'm going to make this one. And what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to file on the inside. So when I do this, the wire might stick off straight and come down at a 90-degree angle. But what I'm going to do then is after I solder this with hard solder, because that keeps it stable, then I can come in and I can start bending this, and I can bend this. And remember, I can bend these after the fact too. I can figure this out and, you know, get halfway around and say, okay, that is long enough for half the bracelet. I can take the whole thing and curve it. You guys ought to take some wire and just play with this. This is much more forgiving and much more fun than you think it is. I promise.
Hey, Deb.
Yeah.
Hey, Deb.
Yeah.
On that, so like once you've started to solder the corners in, the sort of meniscus or the little shape that the solder leaves kind of wants to make it pull. When you bend it, it kind of wants to stick in that corner anyways too, doesn't it? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, don't use that much solder.
Well, I wouldn't want to, but okay.
No, but it does stabilize it. I mean, that's the whole point of it, is that it does stabilize it. Absolutely.
It like almost gives it even more structure.
Oh, it does, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
soldering it definitely gives it more structure. So these are some pieces, like I said, they've been on my bench forever. I haven't decided if they're going to be a ring that I put these two together this way. Something like that into a ring, or whether they're going to be earrings. I think they should be earrings. But I'll figure it out. And when I do, I'll show them to you. But I wanted to show you, this is 14 gauge square wire. And again, very playful. I don't plan this out. I play with it. You know, some curves, some straight, some straighter, some angled, some, you know, say on the same side for 2 or 3, and some on the different sides, and I just play with them. Okay. I want to show you this piece. This is the one that was, that I showed you in the slides. So on this piece, all I have right now is the frame. This is it. And so I can pop the stone in and out of here. It fits tightly, you can see. It's snug. The sides on this are really ugly, and that's why I wanted to hide them. But what I can do with this now is that I can figure out if I want to put a little bit of sheet behind it. I could put prongs on the outside that come all the way over both sides. I can do all kinds of things. What I can do with this, what I have to do with this, is that I will have to finish this frame, and I finish it completely and fully before I do anything else. So that before I solder anything else to this, this is absolutely pristine, which it is not right now. Right now, all of the corners are soldered, and I can fit this piece in snugly. There. Okay. And then I wanted to show you these. These are 2 rings that I've been playing with. Three rings I've been playing with. So this one, worn on the short side on the bottom, if this is on the bottom and this comes around the top, what I'm thinking about doing is curving it a little bit tighter and putting a stone in here. This one is the one I showed you in the slides, and I think I may do something like I carved this piece. I don't know if I'll do that or not. I don't know. I'll play with it. We'll see. But look at these shapes. I think they're gorgeous, and they're really fun. They're really easy to do. I think you guys need to play with your wire. I want to point out this is really heavy rectangular wire. This is 14 gauge square, and this is, I believe, 8 gauge round. Okay. This is rectangular wire, but I want you to look that I scored and bent it on the long side. Look, see, it's skinny. And I scored and bent the long way. So you can do that. There's no reason you can't score and bend the long way. All right, that's what I've got to show you. Any questions?
Deb, maybe this is a really dumb question, but what do you mean by you score and bend it on the long side? What does that mean?
Oh, so most of the time with rectangular wire, when I use it, here, I take the rectangular wire and I would score it this way, okay? So that it bends like this one or this one. But on this wire, what I did was to turn it up, and I scored this way, all the way down, so that I have the width of the wire showing here. That make sense? Yeah. Anything else? Other questions?
Yes, Deb, I have a question about the interlocking 2 things with that wire going behind and in front. What is that going to be, and how are you going to use that? That's so gorgeous.
Thank you. It's a toggle clasp. So that what you have to do, you lift this out and around, and it's on the 2 sides of the necklace, and it comes up and around and lays down in here, and it's the clasp.
That's genius. I just love that.
Thank you. I got to use it on something. I think it came out really nice. I'm really pleased with it.
Deb?
Yes.
I'm still confused about one of the slides that you showed, and it looks like there's nothing on top that prevents it from popping out the front. And I kind of am having a moment about that.
Was it the one that looks like the big slab of stuff?
Yes.
Okay, let me go back to the slides. That one.
Yes. So how come where the stones are, it can't pop out over there?
Because of this angle. So, and this angle. So, because this is angled up and this is angled down, when I put that stone in there, it can't move sideways. You see that?
Uh-huh. Okay.
And if you look at the back, it's got a tab here. It's got the sheet here and the prongs here.
Okay. All right, so tell me this. Suppose for some reason you needed to take that out, take the stone out. What would you have to do that?
I would lift these 3 prongs. Because if I lift these 3 prongs, I can pull this corner up.
Okay.
And then maybe with this tab I can't. I bet I could. If I lift these 3 prongs, I can pull this top edge up and pull the corner up.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I would do my best to not unset that, Dee.
Yeah, well, in a perfect world, you're right. But let me just say, I do not live in a perfect world.
Okay, any other questions?
So Deb, this is Kathy. When you do inside prongs on a frame, should it always be flat or rectangular wire, or can you use round?
No, you can use round. You can use half round. You can use low dome. You can use whatever you want. Remember how it's going to join and how it's going to look when you solder it on. So sometimes when you're soldering prongs on the outside of the wire to go all the way around, you might want to do a low dome or something like that so that it has a soft rounded outside. If you're doing it on the inside, you might want to stick with square or round, but there's no reason that you couldn't do something else.
Now, when I use round on the inside, the solder joint doesn't seem to be as stable because it's only a tiny bit of the round edge is attaching to the square wire. So it should be filed down.
It is a smaller solder joint, but the other thing to remember, Kathy, is that every time that you take your piece of metal and you heat it up and put it in the pickle, you end up with a fine silver layer on the outside. You want to be sure that you clean that off before you attach a prong to it. Because if you don't clean that off, you're just attaching to that fine silver, and that is not a good structural joint. That's not a good solder joint. Okay? So you want to file down so that you are soldering raw metal to raw metal. And then you will find that that is a much stronger solder joint. And even using a round wire, the solder will make a little fillet that'll kind of add, a little structure to it, and it'll be fine.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, class. Thank you for joining me today for this session of Studio Time with Deb online. I'm really glad you were here, and I will see you next week.